Okay, picking back up where we left off in the last video, we're going to look at some more of these poses. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm reading this as like drunk or so tired that he's falling asleep. Maybe it's the hat that's just feeling drunk to me. So I think that's not bad. I think we could do just a little bit more with the spine here, kind of bumping that up, dipping this back. So you get just a little bit more of this like S shape in the spine. But overall, it's actually looking pretty good. This arm feels a little too high up, like the clavicle feels like you're pushing a little bit too much that way. Whereas I think it would actually droop from like here a little bit more. And I'm a little thrown off by no eyes. I don't know where they're at or where they're pointing. So that's. I also feel like this foot feels like it's at a weird angle. I mean, like it's twisted with the toe inward a little too much, and so that feels odd to me. I'd almost think of the toe be pointing out toward the camera a little bit more. Okay, so this one is either a yawn or a flash dance scene. I think that the problem with this one, mainly for me, is the angle, is because this character is arcing back, like stretching. And when it comes to line of action, we're looking at it from one of the dullest angles to see it. So I think that if we were seeing it from the side, the character would be like leaned way back here, reaching with his arm, it would be stretching, that'd be his head, his foot may be out. And so we get these really nice like angles. But right now we're just seeing all that as a straight line. And so I think that we're just losing some of that. So that's my biggest thought there is when it comes to terms of layout. Maybe this is, or your framing, staging, that maybe this is just choosing some of the wrong angles. I also feel like the shoulders and hips are a little, so he's reaching with his hand here. So I would think that the shoulders would have to do this to really sort of favor that. And so that means the arm could dip and be up here like this. I'm trying to think of a way to show that a little bit better. And then, so if that's happening and the head's here, then now we're getting a little bit of this line of action. It's a little less dull. But I think just turning the camera a little bit, you'll get a lot of stuff for free. Okay, so I think this is kind of a yoga pose, if I'm not mistaken. You got a really interesting set of lines here. Thing I would consider, I like this curve, that looks good. I think that the character's weight is a little too far back. And so if we look at this being sort of the base for the weight, right? Or more specifically, it's more like right here, and then we draw a line straight up from this. To me, it feels like it's, this is in balance, right? But there's way more weight hanging off on this side than there is on this side, and so the character feels like they would tip over a little bit. So I think just scooting the hips forward would do a lot for this. The other thing is it feels like both legs are growing out of this one hip ball. So I think you need to rotate this hip forward just a little bit. That way this other one would be, well, you're going to get more like this, and then this leg's going to be coming out of here and this one's going to be going straight down. So that's my thinking on that one. I'm going to assume another yoga pose, kind of interesting. I kind of like seeing it from this angle, even though straight from the side is usually kind of dull. The elbow is kind of pointing up, and I feel like maybe that's not, I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, and how you would actually be able to do that, because I have a hard time, maybe it is, I don't know, but if your hands are touching with your palms, to me it's really hard to kind of point your elbows upward. So try that, try putting your hands together out in front of you, and then try pointing your elbows upward. So I feel like that feels a little inaccurate to me on what's possible. But otherwise, I think that pose actually looks pretty good. So yeah, maybe play around with that a little bit. And so this one, again, like sometimes you can make it work, sometimes it doesn't work as well. So I think this one still needs a little bit of work to get this sort of we'll call it a sassy pose, like kind of a like a you talking to me, like get that sort of sideways head turn, um, and those countering angles. Like usually this is kind of a hard one to pose, but you need to be able to get like some swoopiness out of it, like sort of these like this waviness to it. And I think that some of that's just missing a little bit. I think what you would do is you'd push it over, push the weight over onto this leg a little bit more, and that way when you get this leg is just gonna be pointing outward. It's probably too far. This mouse is, it's not a mouse. It's a yeah. So let's try this here and see if I can do it again. So little foot, probably too far out. So maybe something like that for the other foot, right? And so then we get this hip. So it feels like it's over the other weight a little bit more, or this leg for the weight. And then you can get this sort of sassy twist to the spine, right? And then we get sort of this leaning head pose. And then you kind of got to get this elbow in there for this. But I feel like this elbow pointing out feels a little wrong to me. So maybe it doesn't have it pointing out quite as much. Maybe something a little bit more like that. And so that's an ugly head that I've got drawn there, but you get the idea. So I don't know if that's really that much stronger. I think tucking that elbow in would help. I think pushing her over on this weight and maybe cleaning up a little bit of how her neck kind of turns kind of drastically there. Most of that rotation would sort of happen throughout the entire head neck region, and so you just kind of want to carry some of that rotation down into the neck. Okay, another yoga pose. A couple things here. That's going straight across, and then suddenly the shoulder goes upward. So let's talk about how a shoulder is actually built. If this is your sort of your clavicle bone, right, and then your it kind of hangs over here a little bit, and then your arm is kind of growing out of that. As it rotates up, it only gets to straight out before it locks, and then the rest of the upward motion is actually a rotation from here in your clavicle bone, where your whole clavicle goes up. So the way this clavicle muscle should look is it connects here, not muscle, but the bone looks, is it connects here, right? And then this clavicle should go up to kind of help soften some of that, right? And so I think that just raising the clavicle up would help a little bit. The other thing is, here's the support for our weight. Okay, and so if I just draw a line straight up, why can't I draw a straight line? That's actually leaning a little bit too much, but you get the idea. There's a lot of weight over here on this side over that support. I think just the hips really just need to go over top of this foot way more. Okay, moving on. I lost my spot here. Jensen. It's pretty nice. I like that. I think you could push it more. I don't know if you have to push it more. And by push it more, I mean, push it back a little bit more, maybe add just a touch more bend to the spine. But overall, I think this one's actually working pretty good. That's probably what I would do to work, if you're going to work on it and improve it a little bit more. Maybe just push the hips back, put just a little bit more arc in the spine. So you get a little bit more like this. And then maybe just a touch of like locking this foot a little bit more. Just a little bit. And so what you end up with is maybe something a little bit more like that in the spine. And then you get this posing coming straight out here like that. And this. I'm not sure about this angle on the wrist here, so maybe even... maybe. I don't know. I don't mind the angle on the wrist that bad. I would think it would come more from, again, instead of from the side to side here, like maybe you would have it actually bend backwards and then twist. So I would think about doing that sort of more like how this is bent backwards, a little bit more of that back there. So otherwise, this one's actually looking really good. Move forward here. Okay, this one's pretty good too. I would almost want to see where this hand connects, so maybe turning the head toward us a little bit. Just for clarity reasons, I think it would get you a better silhouette if you had the head turned just a little bit. One hand here, elbow, elbow. One hand here, elbow, elbow, like this, and then maybe the eyes more like over here. I don't know. I'm just kind of playing with this just to kind of get an idea of how that head turn could like help us see sort of the angle of the arms a little bit more. So again, even though you're not, like I almost feel like we're seeing stuff a little bit head on. We're not completely, but like if this is, if this is the eye, the angle that you're seeing it, you don't want to be looking at it straight on that bend, because then to the eye it just looks like a straight line, right? So this not happening too much, but I think we could just sort of twist that around to get a little bit of a stronger angle on the elbows here, just a little bit, maybe a little bit more like that. Does it make sense? But that's very kind of nitpicky, I would say. Um, I like that one. Very nitpicky stuff is, I think a lot of this is kind of getting in each other's way and maybe kind of distracting a little bit there. If that arm was just a little bit higher up and maybe hanging down like right through there, that may help a little bit. Or if we were twisted around a little bit more and we were actually seeing it hanging down between the two legs, that might help a little bit as well. But overall, I really like it. I like how his head just feels like broken. Like I'm getting the emotion out of this one a lot, or maybe the emotion is not the right word. The emotional state. Okay, so overall, this pose is looking good. Like I think your line of action looks nice. I think this hand looks pretty nice. I think the legs are looking good. I don't understand what's happening here. Like those two areas are just kind of hard for me to read. I think it looks like his wrist on his right arm is just really, really bent back. So it may be that his arm is broken. And this is like exciting, or excited in that way of like, oh, it hurts, it hurts. Let me read real quick and see what it is. This one is number 4, which is, of course I can't see it. Let's see. Pensive. Is that right? Sure it's not elated. I think these may be numbered wrong. So that's devastated. Yeah, I think these are kind of in the wrong. That seems more like pensive, and that feels more like nauseated. So I don't know. Maybe the first 3 may be in the wrong order from what we have on the list. But yeah, that's the only thing I noticed on that is the hand being bent back. I think otherwise that's a pretty good pose. So in terms of how this is being shown, I kind of like it. This is kind of a sneak. I think that if we look at the hips rotated this way, it makes the character feel like they're leaning in this direction just a little bit. And so I think you could actually lean them more in this direction, and I would kind of like that a little bit better. The only other thing I see is, so the character's reaching forward with their left foot, but because of the way this is posed, it makes it feel like the left foot is kind of far back here, or the left hip is far back here. And the character's kind of reaching back with the right, or with the left arm, but it feels like the left clavicle is really far forward. So I think that I would kind of reverse those a little bit in the twists and get the foot that's reaching, you want to kind of make it feel like the hip is reaching with it. But otherwise, this one's feeling pretty good. And if this is nauseated, maybe this one's not quite as, I'm feeling a little off balance on it. So maybe having this foot being a little bit more flat here, and like something like that to kind of catch some of that weight that's falling over there. That elbow feels like it's out of touch too much. And I know, I kind of see what you're doing, and that you're trying to make him feel mixed up, like that he's like dizzy and stumbling because his body's all kind of out of whack. But you kind of have to be careful with some of that. So I think this one's not working quite as well for me. I think you could get some of that without breaking some of the line of action stuff. I don't know. The head filling that far over isn't bad, but maybe favor just a touch with this, so that instead of being as far off, maybe it's more a little bit more like that. Sorry, like that or something. And so you're still getting a little bit of that like back and forth. But I don't know. This one's a weird one for me. I think that it needs a little bit more work to kind of think about what the body's doing. I think you get some elbow stuff too. This elbow feels like I'm having a hard time figuring out what that elbow is because the shoulder is so low. And since he's reaching up, but then the clavicle's bent like that, it feels a little confusing to me. Does it make sense? So there's a couple things on that one that I think you could kind of tweak around on. So is that all of them? Yeah. That one's really good though. Okay, Tate. Okay. So, again, getting kind of this line of action that's looking pretty good. I think this elbow may be out just a touch too much, so maybe a little bit more like that would feel, because that feels like it's too much effort to get that elbow that far forward. And if this character's kind of slumping, this arm's feeling good. It's more like this, like, kind of spread out leg thing that's going on here that feels a little odd to me. And so the angle of the knees are so like both are just pointing like opposite directions, like drastically. And so I think you need one of them to kind of tuck in a little bit. My thinking would be that one would sort of tuck in a little bit, and that would kind of complete a little bit more of this line of action if this was in a little bit more, maybe the foot a little bit more like this. I don't know. Like you could play around with it. You don't have to. You could just tuck it in just a touch, and maybe that would help. But there's something in this, the fact that there's just such a big gap here that just feels odd to me. Otherwise, this one's feeling pretty good. That and this elbow just feels like it's a touch too far out, and if you tuck it in a little bit more, that would feel more relaxed, or more exhausted, maybe is the word. Nice, I like it. So it's feeling good. This is feeling really good. Like I like that, those angles a lot going on there. So thinking about this, why are you choosing to kind of feel like this leg is the one that has more of the weight on it? My first instinct was to tell you to push it over here, over this leg a little bit more, but then that gives it something different. This seems like he's considering, and so it kind of screws with your line of action a little, but not bad, to have that happening. But when you do that, it makes it feel like the character's kind of pulling back a little bit as if he's staring at something in a gallery. Like he's considering something, he's looking at and thinking about it. And so that's the impression I get from this, is they're staring at something in a gallery and considering it. And so I think that having it over this leg is alright. Maybe even emphasize that a touch more by putting the weight a little bit further over there and locking this this leg down a little bit more. But otherwise, this one's feeling pretty good to me. Yeah, this one's looking good too. A couple of little things, you may be able to just emphasize this a touch more, sort of bring it out a little bit more into the silhouette. And then the reason I say that is because if we look at this, you got this, like all kind of tight in there. And then you get these like points that are interacting in here and stuff. And so this, having this hand this close, like there's, I think pulling this hand out this way a touch and then pulling this hand back this way a touch would really kind of help clear that up. So if we did it and it looked more like this, that may help a little bit. So just a touch. It's a very, very minute tweaks, but I think that would help with that a little bit. Okay, so I'm reading this as kind of a sneak, maybe. So in terms of the sneak, I think you can just push this one more, like really kind of work in this curve really deep, you know, really thick line of action. The character needs to be back on the rear foot that's supporting the weight while they sort of tentatively test the waters with this foot. So, and then the elbows and the hands are feeling a little confusing to me though. Why they're doing it like that? So I would think it would almost be more like rotating the heel back or the wrist back, and they're like kind of holding their hands maybe a little in more toward their chest or something. I don't know. That one's what to do with the hands. I think is one of those just like play around with it. But again, we're getting a kind of a busy area right here, and so I think making that a little less busy would be very good. Um, Pretty good stuff going on here. You got a nice line of action. I like these angles of the arms. Those are looking good. My only note on this one is going to be, again, kind of how tangled up some of this is getting. And so I think it's there where that contacts and there. And like all of these like repeating shapes just start to confuse your eye if you just glance at it. And so I think you need to clear that up a little bit. And it's also, they're very similar. So I'd pull one, I think just by pulling this one in the back down a little bit more, like maybe something like that, then what you get is a nicer like line of action all the way through it. So that's probably what my 2 cents would be on that. It's actually really close. You could choose to pull this one down if that's the one you wanted to, but I would say pull one of them just to sort of break up some of that symmetry and twinning going on. This has got some twinning, but because of the angle, and it's a very strong angle, it's not really reading as that very much, so I'm alright with that. And then this one, I think this is looking pretty good too. Really nice line of action. Let me look at it one more second. I think that you could break up these feet just a touch. It's kind of clumping right in there like the shapes are. And kind of, your eye gets a little lost in there, so I think just pulling that foot away or just messing around with that just a little bit, but otherwise this one's really solid. So good work on that. Okay. Joe. It's pretty nice. I like the idea. This is an interesting character, so you got an alright line of action going on here. I think that maybe it's just because of how this character is made, a lot of those two areas are feeling a little more confusing. I do think it's part of because of how the character is made, but you're always going to get characters that have those issues. Each character is going to have its own posing issues, so kind of showing this maybe from a slightly different angle, like maybe a little higher and around to the around this way to the character's left. So we'll see it just a little bit more in profile, not a lot, but a little bit. I think that would really help clear up some of those clarity issues there. Okay, so we'll talk about headroom. When we're showing a character in 3D, we just need to be careful not to give them a little bit of a gap there. And then I also think because that just makes them feel crunched, right? It makes them feel like there's not enough room, and it also like asks us where we're supposed to be looking, because like the point of interest is here, and that's just, I don't know, for some reason it's not pulling my eye to there when we got all this big empty space over here, and we're playing around with some of that. So I think we could kind of sort of pull that down, and then I think on top of that, coming up with a slightly different angle to view it, because we got this arm, but then right here, right next to it, we got this going on, and so if you try drawing this out, it actually gets really muddy and kind of hard to tell what's going on. So I think you could clarify that a little bit more just by having like a little bit of a gap in there, right? Maybe the arm comes out more like here, and this arm's just a touch more straight, or something like that, just to kind of get a little bit more clarity. And I think just playing around with where you're putting your camera, you're also getting this, like, it's cutting the toe off. And so that's not bad, but do we want to have the toe kind of pop out on one side a little bit to round that off? So just playing around a little bit with some of those will help. That was actually looking pretty good. I can't tell about the weight. You want to make sure that the weight is over this leg. From this angle, it looks like it is. I think from here we could improve it a little bit by maybe making it a little bit more drastic, like maybe really pushing it, the rotation here, just really kind of playing with it that way. But otherwise, I think this is actually working pretty well. So you may be able to exaggerate it, but there's not a lot particularly broken on this one. Not sure. Is this like an attack? I guess the character jumping through the air and attacking. Um, so let's look at the line of action here. So that's looking pretty good there. But then we get to this glob of arm elbow thing going on here. So I think just having it kind of dip down, come back up, and then being able to see the elbow, and then we can go across through here. Like that's probably a better idea. Also, the spine's just feeling kind of stiff. So especially for such a dynamic pose, like I would think you'd want something like that, like it comes out of this knee, goes up the leg, and that the spine is really kind of, bending forward here or something like that, and the head doing this, especially if this is an attack, arm out, maybe a little bit more like that or something, and then this doing this. So I don't know, I would play around with it a little bit just to see what else you can get to make this a little bit more dynamic. This looks like the character on the ground ready to fight him. Again, you kind of just have to watch out for sort of coincidental lines or things that are kind of feeling like they're blocking. So like this feels like it's blocking part of his face, and so that feels a little awkward to me. Maybe rotating him forward a little bit like this, and then having this arm here, and then this other arm maybe a little further out. So maybe a little bit more like that. I also feel like the character's weight feels like it's back a little too far, so maybe this leg needs to go back a little bit, just for dynamic reasons too. Like, would that read better back like this? I don't know. Just kind of playing around with it to get a little bit more of a dynamic flow. So this one's actually really interesting in your spine and head. I think this is working pretty well. But then we got a couple of things that aren't working as well. One, we got this thing where it's kind of going right off the page. So it may just be a framing thing, just sort of pull back a little bit, so that's not happening. This foot is kind of the toes pointing right at us. So if we actually had it just slightly turned to the side, that would read even better. And then the other thing is, again, the hand is kind of blocking parts of the face. So just those little things there, kind of getting that out of the way, just so we can see everything clearly. Even though he doesn't have any facial features, it still makes us feel awkward to see that. Okay. I like that. Why is this thing auto-saving? I don't have anything open. So we can talk about this one. In terms of the character, I love the character. I feel like the spine feels a little stiff, like it's a little straight. So you could always add just a little bit more of a curve to it. And that way you get a little bit more like this going on. I think that would help it a little bit and make it a little bit more exaggerated. But otherwise, this one's feeling pretty good to me. So this is another one where I'm again kind of feeling like this is a little too. I want to say 20 as much as symmetrical or even. Like the shoulders going straight across. So like, what happens if you push this over the front leg a little bit, and then had him sort of bent forward a little bit? Like, does that make that more dynamic? I mean, I think it does, but just figuring out how to pose that and everything. I think just the fact that it's kind of like the body is still kind of level and not sort of balancing itself by shifting would really it just makes it a little less dynamic and a touch more boring. So you need to sort of beef up a little bit of that to make it more exciting. So here you got pretty good. Let's get this here. Interesting character. I keep calling it a he, but I guess it doesn't have to be, because this feels like a somewhat feminine pose. to me. The biggest reason for that is because the hips are really high, and you got a stronger contrapposto. So men have a little bit more tendency to have a slightly more rigid spine, where females kind of do this a little bit more. I think that kind of have a little bit more of this contrapposto thing going on. And the arm out, and so it doesn't have to be female. It just feels more feminine. The other thing is that I think the weight would be, because it's up on this tiptoe, I still feel like the weight is, this leg doesn't have as much force to apply to it, so I feel like it should be over this way just a touch. And maybe even leaning this way just a touch more. It's a very small amount. So it's actually a pretty nice pose. I think we're running into some of the things of, well, we saw another pose similar to this earlier. Like this angle, like all of this stuff here is just really getting tangled up, and it's kind of like the Christmas lights tangled up in a mess of pieces here. That I think that just kind of needs to be shown at a slightly different angle to kind of make that more clear. Some of that's just how his hands work, and it's gonna feel that way. So you kind of have to combat that. I also feel like that this should be underneath this leg, but I may be wrong. Having it tucked in there is it's making this area in here a little busy too, figuring out what's the calf, what's the knee, what's, that sort of stuff. This one actually is feeling pretty good to me, with one exception, is I feel like the character is a little too heavily weighted to the front. So pushing them back over the base here. So if this is the base, let me draw it this way. I draw a 3D box straight up. This is the area that is being supported in that weight. You got a lot of mass in here that's kind of hanging out in the front of that, pulling it forward. So I think you gotta push it back just a touch to make it believable. But otherwise, this one's actually a really nice pose. Oh, cool. I like that. So there's going to be a couple very tiny things. One being the fact that this knee and this line of the body just kind of hit at the same point. It's called a coincidental line. So just doing something like rolling the knee a little bit forward more, just to make it more like that, will help that. I want to feel, no, I don't. I was going to say I wanted to feel like the body was rotating forward a little bit more, but then that's different. Because then right now you want it to feel like it's rotating backwards. So maybe even amp that up just a touch, but if so, it's just a touch. Because it feels like you want him to feel like he's trying to get away from something, or her. I keep calling it him, but you get the idea. Okay. Oh, man. Okay, let's open that back up. Open anything back up. Go back up to where that's at. Sorry about this. I know it's making it. Okay, so who's next? Okay, Robert. Okay. Okay, again, just in terms of framing, like, all of this is unnecessary. So when we see it that way, it's like, why can't we be viewing this pose like that, or maybe like that? And really just, so that's a factor of staging, and the fact that all of this out through here is just not really necessary for us to see that. So that's a big one that I would work with. The idea is kind of leaning back on it. I'm not really feeling the force where it's contacting his back there, and so maybe you would sort of rotate his spine forward on these top two. this is an odd one too because he doesn't have an eye, he just has a nose, so I always think that that's one of his eyes, and it kind of throws me off a little bit. But I think that this doesn't feel very relaxed. I think in my head, if he were leaning back against the wall and this were the wall, his back would be like that, and then his hips would roll forward a little bit, right? So this is more of his torso, and then this one's forward, propped up here. This one's sort of hanging out there, and the head's forward, and then the arms behind the head. So I'm just looking at this from the profile view. The arms behind the head would be, slightly different. So that's my thinking, that it just feels like a little bit too stilted, a little less relaxed. Okay. So thinking on how much the arm, couple things. I feel like we got a little bit of twinning going on here. The spine is very straight considering the head is leaning back so far. And then we get a little bit of twinning going on with the knees. Like this just feels like the same leg twice. And somewhat in the arms too, although from a slightly different angle. I also think that, so if you try to twist your hand, like hold your arm out and try to twist your hand around like this, palm up, right? There's only so far you can twist before it stops, and I feel like your character has twisted past that point. It's almost like if I were looking straight on to a hand that was coming toward me, right? And then this is the thumb hanging out here. On this side is the thumb. So this is straight on. The arm is kind of going backwards here and foreshortening chest, whatever, head. What I should feel like is happening is this thumb is way down here, like really low. So what it actually feels like to me is instead of that, you're getting more like this. And that's actually really hard to bend back your thumb that far. And so both of those palms kind of feel that way to me. But the biggest thing is just the spine is kind of straight and boring and like not very dynamic. And I think it really just needs to be cleaned up to kind of just make this feel a little bit more dynamic. Kind of the same with this. The spine's still feeling kind of boring to me, and the hips, like their location, feels odd to me. Not odd, but just like not very intense. So if this is the finger pointing out here, maybe what you need is to push the hips over to here a little bit more. Get a little bit more of this sort of a dynamic leaning away pose. And then that way the arm goes like this, and then you get the head here, right? And so you get a little bit more of a backwards curve to the spine, and that would make your line of action feel more like that. And then the fact that you just barely see little parts of the arm peeking forward, I'm kind of like, either show it to me or don't show it to me. Like either put it out in front a little bit more where I can see it, or kind of keep it tucked back there behind it. But these are just little like distracting peaks. So kind of play around with that a little bit. So I'm guessing like devastated, but then again the spine is perfectly straight, and so I really think that this would be really curved over, really drooping this head. The spine would be really bent, and then so even this hand feels a little stiff. Like it's feel like it's you curled the fingers forward, but didn't really think of like how it's contacting the ground. So just thinking a little bit in that. This hand's not bad. That's feeling pretty good. And then the toes are kind of blowing through the leg, so I think you need to roll up onto the ball of the toe just a little bit more to get that one working. Okay. Maybe it's just how this character's spine works, but this spine still just feels like there's not been a lot done to it. So like I think this would feel like if we could get a rounder shape, kind of round that off a little bit in the spine. And then if we look at the hips, that hip doesn't feel like it's like this hip needs to feel like it's a little bit further back, and the hip on the other side needs to feel like it's a little further forward. Um, and then the same with these shoulders. That shoulder needs to feel further forward, while this shoulder needs to feel further backward. And then again, like we've talked about this with a few people, sort of this direct side pose is a little dull to look at sometimes. So let's see where we're at. Okay, this is interesting. This one's not bad. Again, I think the spine, maybe it's just this character's spine's not that great for posing. The spine just feels a little weak and dull to me. So I think of this as if the character were leaning in on it like this and looking at this ball in their hand. Then it would feel much more like wonder and curiosity. Okay. Any more? Nope. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the videos. I got 4 more to go, and I will finish those up here in the next video.